With this photograph, we are going to learn a fascinating technique that we can use in order to create a really distinct color and tone. And what this will allow us to do is create this muted, kind of interesting contrast type of aesthetic. Well, this particular photograph was captured by one of my students, Shiloh Strong. Shiloh, thanks a ton for the use of this file. And here you can see we have two layers. We have the background layer, here's the original as captured, and then a layer after some basic retouching. Now, we accomplished this retouching in one of my other training titles on portrait retouching, so we're not going to focus in on that. But what we are going to focus in on is how we can enhance and creatively modify the color and tone. Well, in analyzing the photograph, one of the things that I noticed is that the background's pretty bright for the most part, yet the model in this case is wearing some darker colored clothes. So I want to be able to control the effect on the model and also the background separately. Therefore, in order to do that, we need to make a selection. Well, let's work on selecting the model. One easy way to do that is to grab a quick select tool. And here we're going to go ahead and choose a really small brush. So I have a nice and small brush there. And we're going to simply click and paint across the subject. And in this case, we want to make sure we're just selecting the subject there. We want to make our way to all these little edges and just click and paint across this. If ever you select too much, well, you can simply hold down the Option key and then click to subtract. For example, I'm going to need to subtract this area here. So I hold down Option on a Mac, Alt on Windows. That will then subtract that from the selection. All right, great. So we'll go ahead and just keep painting along this area. And the great thing about Quick Select is that there's actually some built-in memory. In other words, as you make additions or subtractions to your selection, Photoshop takes notes of those and tries to build a better selection. So again, hold Option or Alt to subtract, and then simply click and drag to add a little bit more. And I'll go ahead and just try to add a bit there. This selection doesn't need to be perfect because it's just going to be a selection which will help us modify color and tone. And I think this is pretty good. I'll hold down the Option or Alt key here and subtract that little area and just tighten this up on the arm a bit. And I want to evaluate all my edges, make sure I'm going in a relatively decent direction. I think this is okay. All right, well, the next step is going to be to create an adjustment. And the first adjustment we're going to create is a black and white adjustment. We'll make that adjustment and then we'll apply a blending mode. So let's go ahead and click on the black and white adjustment layer icon. Well, here we can see we have this adjustment and the model is now in black and white, except there are a few little edges that aren't perfect. Well, let's refine those. We'll go over to our mask panel. We'll go to Mask Edge. Here I'll turn on Smart Radius and I'll increase my radius. I should also point out that you can view this in different ways. Sometimes seeing it on a black background can be helpful, or a white background. In this case, I like seeing it on the layers because it kind of helps me see what's in color and what's not in color. In this case, I'll smooth my edges out a little bit, increase the contrast there, and just by doing this, it's already improving a lot of those edges where I had some problems. And again, this doesn't have to be perfect, but we want it to be pretty good. Next, click OK. Well, if you notice any other problem areas, target your mask, grab your brush tool, and paint with white or black to fix up your edges. In this case, I'll paint with white to add a little bit more of this desaturation effect over here and a couple of these areas that were missed when I made that selection. Also on the knuckles up there, just make sure those are all painted in, and over here as well. All right, well, now that I've sweetened up that selection or that mask just a bit here, what I want to do next is I want to change the blending mode of this layer. And we're going to change the blending mode of this layer to soft light. Now, in order to be an advanced user, why don't we try using the shortcut to change that blending mode? Here's how you do this. Press the V key. Next, on a Mac, press Shift Option F. On Windows, press Shift Alt F. Now, if you don't like shortcuts, no big deal. Simply choose this blending mode from this pull-down menu here. All right, well, already the image is starting to look interesting. Here we have before and then after. Well, we want to customize this even further, so go ahead and double-click the black and white adjustment layer icon. What we're going to do is we're going to modify the skin tone by increasing the red channel there. See how the skin looks really nice and kind of white? Here we have our before and then after. It gives it that bleached kind of muted contrast type of look. We can go through these other channels as well and see if we can make any adjustments. And again, we're not going to see anything huge here, but maybe a couple little adjustments that might be nice. Primarily, it's going to be the reds and the yellows in order to get that skin looking great. All right, well, we can already start to envision how this image is going to come together, right? Except there's a problem. One of the big problems is all of the black detail here is just completely lost. I want to save some of that. So in order to do that, what we'll do is double click this layer to open up advanced blending. So if you double click away from the layer name, this opens up our layer style dialog. Well, if you know about advanced blending, you know that you can drag these sliders up here for our blacks to save the blacks, or you can drag this slider down to save the whites. Well, here we want to work on the blacks. So we click and drag up. As we do that, we'll start to see the black detail really come back. And I'm going to zoom in on the photograph so that you can see what we're looking at here. Press the spacebar key to reposition. Again, if you look at the black detail, you can see how that's really brought back. Now the problem is whenever you bring back detail like this, the edges will look a little bit chunky. They need some work. They're too jagged. So in order to fix that, we hold down Option on a Mac, Alt on Windows, and we split these sliders. That gives us a really nice transition. Here you can see that before and after, saving all of that detail. Here we want to zoom out so we can evaluate the other areas as well, make sure the whole image is looking good. And here you can see that before and after. And while it may be a little tricky to see in this movie because it's small, you have to experiment on your own files. But this can really save the day when it comes to just maintaining this look and this effect without overdoing the deepness of the blacks. The great thing about this as well is when we click OK, we can always go back and modify that further. Let's say we decide, that doesn't look very good. Double click your layer. You'll see that those settings are still saved here. And all we need to do is just find the right spot for that particular look. All right, well, let's click OK and evaluate. Here we have our before and after of this first stage of the image. Well, already the image is looking a little bit more intriguing. Well, what I want to do is I want to add just a touch more of this effect. So one easy way to do that is to duplicate the layer and then lower the layer opacity. And a lot of times when you duplicate your layer, you're going to want to take your opacity down to 10 or 20 or 30%. Well, let's give this a try. We can duplicate the layer by pressing Command or Control J. All right, well now we have too much of the effect, right? This is over the top. Well, we can modify it either by changing our slider values here. We could change those. Or we could modify it by lowering our opacity, as I mentioned before, just taking this way down. Either way, do what you need to do just to get a little bit more of that into this image. And again, we can use these sliders just to get this to the right spot. And it's a subtle little change, but I like how it just adds a little bit more snap to that area. Now, while this isn't an essential layer, with some photographs, this can really help. And keep in mind, we're going for nuance. We're going for distinct aesthetic. So all these little fine-tuned adjustments that we make do eventually add up. All right, well, here's a great breaking point. We've completed stage 1. We can see our before and then our after. We're ready to progress to stage 2, and let's pick this up where we've left off here in the next movie.